Greetings, Earthlings. Oz coming at you from planetOZ, and as you can see, I'm kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to costuming, but I am nonetheless continuing to pretend to be an Earthling during October and celebrating with you all in these costumes. So anyway, the topic today is, why do extraterrestrials abduct cows? And this is a very interesting topic I find incredibly fascinating. And so I'm going to briefly go over what happens here as I understand it, and then offer an explanation for this phenomenon that is absolutely paranormal, but not necessarily extraterrestrial. I know, and I mean, this is Oz. This is planetOZ. I see an extraterrestrial everywhere. I think extraterrestrials are the answer to every other question, but you know, and they might be in this one too. But this is a very fascinating answer that you might not have heard elsewhere. So yeah, let's get to it. Let's get started here with this one. This is something that I've wanted to talk about for quite a while. So. Okay, firstly, yeah, the punchline, the running joke about the ETs and the flying saucers and the cows. There's a lot of truth, or at least a lot of good reason why people fascinate about this topic. And a really good resource is this book called An Alien Harvest, written by Linda Moulton Howe, and a lot of you probably know she's a very well-known researcher on the UFO ET topic, and before getting into that, she comes from a background of journalism, and so she came upon these incidents with the cows, which in this book and elsewhere, it's of course referred to by the somewhat gruesome title cattle mutilation, and that is that is appropriate given what happens to these animals. And so anyway, but Linda Moulton Howe got interested in this topic, I think just coming at it from a journalistic mystery perspective, and then she put her research into this book, and it's really great. It's very, because of her journalistic approach, it has a very journalistic style to it. It includes a lot of news stories, headlines. Here's cattle mangled by UFOs, and it's ends with the question, predators or UFOs? What's the answer? So that's what we are looking for today. And I'll just a little word of forewarning: if you do end up taking an interest in this topic, if you haven't looked at it before, or you end up getting this book or looking for this online, I'm not flipping open here to some of the grisly pictures that are in the book, and there are a lot of them. That's, you know, from an animal welfare standpoint, it is it's difficult to look at some of this stuff, but it is not gratuitously put in the book. It is. It wouldn't. I don't think would be fair to say that. I think it's very important to see actually what these injuries look like, because it's only when really seeing it with your own eyes can you make an assessment as to whether or not there's a mystery here. And so why is it a mystery? Why isn't it just scavengers, which is one explanation? It's just scavengers. Typically what will happen is a rancher will be looking for one of his cattle. He'll come upon it, and he'll find it with this very mysterious set of injuries. And so as is outlined in this book, I will explain what a typical cattle mutilation, as they're called, what it looks like. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of reports of these worldwide. So this isn't really a localized phenomena. You could say it's pranksters or people with this kind of agenda or someone doing this, but this is going on worldwide. So yes, what will happen is a rancher will come upon a cattle who he'll find the cattle, the cow dead, and it will have very distinct characteristics. And these characteristics are very common throughout the many, many, many reports of these. And basically, it works like this. The cow is typically missing one eye, the tongue, some of the flesh on the face, the heart, the genitals, and the rectum. And it is the consistency with which these cows are missing these same things that's the first reason that people have trouble with the solution that this is just scavengers, because scavengers, of course, scavenge whatever they can get, however they can get it, and so they don't really stick to rules like only one eye, or ignoring a lot of the other vital organs or the other meat that would be viable in favor of just consuming these specific things. Because another aspect of this is the cow is frequently untouched by any kind of scavengers outside of these particular specific injuries. This is another thing that's talked about in the book and is very often reported. The scavengers don't mess with these particular cows. So there isn't really the trademarks of scavenging to even confuse the issue. There are only the injuries specifically made during whatever happened to this cow, and then it's left alone after that. These ranchers will say that for days. Nothing will come near it or touch it, and so that's just another factor that adds to the mystery. But so this is how these animals are found, and the injuries that they've sustained have an aspect to them that essentially looks as if they were as if these incisions were done very precisely with a scalpel or a laser with I guess you would describe them as like cauterized wounds that are basically healed up and very even and very deliberate and very intentional looking, which for a long time caused a key speculation to be that these were some sort of satanic cults or something like that. There's plenty of news stories about that, where that's believed to be the culprit, and the reason is just because it's so human appearing in nature, or at least not scavenger, not animals. It looks like intent is behind this. So even the heart is is basically like surgically, appears to be surgically very cleanly removed. And it's even the case in some of these stories. In one of them, there was a veterinarian who was looking at one of these cows. And not only was the heart removed, and it was, very surgically and cleanly removed, but there wasn't any way for this veterinarian to know that until he had cut into the cow and got into the chest cavity. So in other words, according to his account, there was no incision going in there. So even if it was a human with a laser scalpel or something of that nature, that wouldn't explain that particular case, because somehow the heart was removed without anything actually happening to the cow. No point of entry to get in there. So all of these things just stack on each other and just lend fuel to this mystery of what is going on with the cows. And since it doesn't look like animals, it seems to have intelligent intent, and since human explanations have to reach into like satanic cults and things like that, it's just like, it's such a puzzle that, of course, extraterrestrials enter into the mix. And so then there is this idea of these cows being abducted and their organs harvested. And it's worth noting one other critical aspect to these reports that fit this particular profile. One is that there isn't any trampling that can be observed around the carcass of these animals, and there isn't any blood. So that's something that you really would never encounter in a scavenger situation. Of course there would be blood. It would be messy. These are not messy at all. They are very clean. It's just the cow is found dead, and these particular elements are missing. So so anyway, what is a potentially interesting explanation for this? Well, the questions about this were asked during the sessions of the Law of One, and I'm going to do my best to unpack what is said here. It's pretty dense, and I feel subject to interpretation. If anyone has refinements on it, by all means, let me know. I'm taking my best crack at this. It's complex material, but anyway, it's also funny. I went on to the lawofone.info. On that website is the full text of the Law of One, and I went in there and I typed cattle and to get some hits, because I knew there were questions that were asked, and I found one of them, and then I was going back to pull it from the book, and I just was scratching my head. I couldn't find it. I couldn't figure out why it wasn't matching up. And then when I read closely on I printed out from the lawofone.info site, begins with, I want to ask a rather questionable question. I may not put it in the book. So, most things ended up in the books, but every once in a while, maybe I'll spend a minute or two with the theory on why this may not have ended up in the book. But anyway, this particular collection of questions and answers here would have been in the first book, but it was omitted. It's on you can find it on the website. So anyway, it starts with the questioner asking, I want to ask a rather questionable question. I may not put it in the book. I was wondering if cattle mutilations that we now experience across the country and elsewhere could be explained by you. And the response, I am Ra. The greater part of your so-called mutilations take place according to the ways of your second density beings which feed upon carrion. A portion of these so-called mutilations are those which are what you may call multidimensional type, a thought form construct using various parts in order to have life and being in third density. So I'm going to come back and kind of break these things down. The first part of this simply is the greater part of your so-called mutilations take place according to the ways of your second density beings feeding upon carrion. I think that just means most of what we put under the umbrella of cattle mutilations are misdiagnosed, I guess you would say, mislabeled as this particular phenomena, when in fact it is scavenger behavior. But nonetheless, a portion are of the multi-dimensional type. So I'll come back and break this down a little bit more. So the questioner says, where do these thought forms come from? Answer, I am Ra. This is a very ambiguous question. However, we will attempt to answer. Firstly, they come from the Creator. Secondly, they come from what you may call lower astral and plane thought. Thirdly, in construct visualization complex, they reside in part beneath the crust of your planet. Next, the questioner asks, are these from one form in particular? The answer, I am Ra. These entities may take any thought form associated with an emotion of fear or terror. And the questioner asks, are these thought forms able to attack only cattle, or can they also attack human beings? The answer, I am Ra. These thought forms cannot attack third density beings. So that's really dense, I realize, and it's a lot of stuff. But just for continuity, I'm going to just finish out the rest of what's said about this phenomena in the Law of One. This other part, there's more in the second book, and this stuff was in the books. So here the questioner says, I don't know if it is of any importance, but it occurred to me that the parts removed from the cattle mutilations are the same every time. And I wondered if this is related to the energy centers and why they were important if this was so. Answer, I am Ra. This is basically correct if you may understand that there is a link between energy centers and various thought forms. Thus, the fears of the mass consciousness create the climate for the concentration upon the removal of bodily parts which symbolize areas of concern or fear in the mass consciousness. Then the questioner says, are you saying then that these parts that are removed are related to the mass consciousness of the third density human form, and that this fear is being used in some way by the thought form entities in these mutilations? Answer, I am Ra. This is correct. The thought form entities feed upon fear. Thus, they are able to do precise damage according to systems of symbology. So, yeah, so that's a lot of verbiage, and it's subject to interpretation. I maybe somebody else has it exactly, specifically, and perfectly clear, but basically what I'm going to do here, and what I did to try to understand what that was saying, was I drew from a lot of the rest of the Law of One to try to give more context to these particular areas of questioning. For example, there are other parts where Ra is asked about governments having possession of extraterrestrial craft and things like that, and engagement, encounters between extraterrestrials and people of this planet, and when there are extraterrestrials involved, that is the answer. So there's plenty of other parts where craft are acknowledged and encounters are acknowledged and these things are acknowledged. So in other words, what I'm saying was, if it were simply ETs from Zeta Reticuli who were flying down here and scooping up cows and harvesting their organs, that would have been the answer. They would have just said that. The ETs are coming. It would not have been, it wouldn't have been out of step at all with the rest of the raw material. So instead, the focus of the responses are really all about consciousness and mass consciousness, and then our fears, and then later it goes on to ask even about the energy centers or the chakras and how they might correlate to the specific consistent injuries to the cows. And so that's why I laid that all out earlier, because it all comes together into to form a picture of what this is. And so my interpretation of it, is basically that it would basically work like this, taken all in aggregate. What I think is being said is that as a collective consciousness and mass, humanity has a very primal fear of something terrible happening to our food supply. Particularly, it's this kind of boogeyman specter of a fear that something terrible will happen to our food supply, something perhaps unknown, out of our control, and as a consequence of this, our what we would see as fragile relationship with our food supply, as a consequence of this, should something terrible happen to our food and we end up starving, then that is ultimately going to result in our failure to reproduce and ultimately our extinction. So, of course, it's wholly logical that a humanity would have collective fears about its own extinction. And this correlates to, on an individual's level, in terms of energy centers, which were discussed in the second set of questions, the energy centers, and talking about the root energy center and its correlation to our primal needs and survival. So in the same way that we have these energy centers individually, and the individual centers correlate with different aspects of our worries and our emotions and all of that stuff, so it's the same for our collective. Humanity as a whole has effectively energy centers, has a root chakra and a sacral chakra and all of that, and it has all of the fears and blockages, or however you want to look at it, all of that stuff associated with those in an individual also are in play at the societal level. So there is another aspect of this mystery that plays into this explanation before I go further with it, and that is this. In the countless, many accounts of UFO encounters that I've read about, there are many that are out there, and I've heard experts talk about it and talk about this particular issue. It is extremely rare to find anything in which anyone makes reference to cows. In other words, they might have an encounter, they might be taken into a craft, they could see a mothership, they could report all kinds of stuff, and thousands of people do this, but you don't hear about someone coming upon a situation where they see a flying saucer taking a cow, or that they're on board a ship and there's cows on there that have been taken, or they saw a cow fall out of the sky. You really don't hear that. I can think of maybe one or two times I heard any kind of mention that was anything like that. And that is very strange, because at the very least you would think when it comes to the phenomena of people encountering extraterrestrials and being taken aboard craft, experiences or abductions, depending on the telling of the story, these things, a lot of this comes from many thousands of accounts of encounters, of personal encounters. So it is very strange. It's very weird that we don't have an answer, even an anecdotal answer from people just happening upon this. It's as if it kind of always happens when we're not looking. And so the reason I mentioned that aspect of the story is because I believe that Ra is essentially painting a picture of a phenomena that is occurring as a result of our collective conscious. In other words, we as a society, at the human level, we are manifesting this phenomena because our fears are part of the beliefs that become the shared beliefs that we all have in the collective. And when we have, as a society, this primal fear of starvation, of an attack on our food supply, we manifest it. And as I mentioned a little earlier, my theory is that what we are manifesting specifically is an attack on our food supply and losing our food supply to something unknown. That's a key aspect. So this idea is paranormal, but it's not exactly extraterrestrial because, in essence, the reason that nobody would ever come upon this phenomena, and no one ever seems to see it happen, and it always happens that the cow is out of sight of us all when it magically experiences this, would be because what we are manifesting is an unknown. So the boogeyman that we as a collective are afraid of is an unknown. We're afraid of something unknown attacking our food supply, causing our starvation, and ultimately leading to our extinction. And in that sense, it's almost as if, the Ra keeps emphasizing thought form and consciousness and stuff like that. It's almost as if there isn't actually a thing to see. There isn't actually anything to ever observe, because the manifestation of the fear includes the unknown aspect of it. So we only manifest the result because we don't know what actually does it. So it's almost as if the cow wanders out of sight, is off somewhere where the collective consciousness knows it is safe from view of the collective, and then almost as if slipping through a little seam in reality, or a jumping of a timeline, or whatever kind of metaphysical mechanism would happen to allow it, it would nonetheless be the case that it's sort of innate to the phenomena that it happens out of our sight. Because the point isn't that it's extraterrestrials. It's not that we're afraid of extraterrestrials attacking our food supply. We're afraid of something, an unknown, whatever. And so this would be my interpretation. This is my idea of what this is saying and a way to interpret it. And I think it's to a certain extent bolstered by the questions that came later regarding the energy centers and the correlation between the energy centers and what we're seeing. So, so the way that would, if I'm geeking out further on this interpretation of what's happening here, then I'm looking at these specific injuries that are always the same: the one missing eye, the missing tongue, the missing heart, the missing genitals, and the missing rectum. So that consistency of injury, I think, essentially what Ra is saying is that not only are we manifesting a fear of an unknown attack on our food supply, but also the specificity of our fear is it drills deeper than that. It gets even more specific than that. Not only is the food supply attacked, in other words, a cow is found dead, but there's another level to this where the way in which it is found dead is very specific. And so if that is actually if that is actually manifesting from an energy center kind of point of view, what that might mean is that it's something like the tongue would be missing because it's the food supply, and the eye is missing because this is some sort of an unknown that we can't figure out. The rectum is missing because that is a root chakra connection to the primal fear of survival. And then the heart is gone because it's ultimately a fear of basically the heart and the genitals, I think, are both gone because they represent the fear first of death and then ultimately of failure to reproduce and extinction. So, you know, I don't know. I'm putting an interpretation on this. It is a phenomenal, I guess we would say paranormal explanation, metaphysical, in that we are essentially manifesting this unknown attack, and then we are manifesting the specific way that it presents itself based on the very specific nature of the fears. And so that's one interpretation. I think it fits with a lot of the odd points related to the mystery, and of course it would depend to a certain extent on a belief that our realm is a manifestation of our collective consciousness, and therefore all within it, the fears, the phenomena, the weirdness, that would all manifest too. That one aspect of building our realm with our collective consciousness kind of explains millions of phenomena right there. But anyway, it's just it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting mystery. It's a puzzle, but taken from the best sources that I know of, that is, in a nutshell, what might be going on with the aliens' fascination with cows, aka cattle mutilation. So anyway, take care, y'all. Godspeed. Oz from planetOZ, signing off.